Hey everybody, we're going to talk about exposure now. So exposure is how bright or dark you make the picture based on the settings that you use and how those settings can affect how the picture looks. So here I am on the North Shore, Lake Superior is right behind me. I'm going to talk about creating a good exposure for the landscape photo I'm about to take. So in this picture, I'm working on trying to get a good exposure. What you'll see right now is the sky is really bright. The ground actually looks pretty good. The issue that I'm having, and this is the issue that you'd have as well, is that sometimes parts of your picture are going to be brighter than other parts of the picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my exposure to make the sky look the way that I want, and I'll take a picture like that. And then if I wanted to focus a little bit more on the water, I could then take a picture where the water is the correct exposure. So to make the sky look the way that I want it to, I'm going to switch to reduce the amount of light here. So I'm actually going to start just by changing my ISO and make that a little bit darker, and we'll see how that sky begins to come into a little bit better light. So I'm going to take a picture like that, and then I'm purposely going to underexpose even more, and you'll see how the sky starts to look even more brilliant. I'm starting to get to the point where it's a bit too dark. Okay. So now I'm going to do a picture where it looks like the water is the way that I want it. So I'm going to take a few like this, just so I've got some to work with. I could, in Photoshop, combine these pictures together so that I've got a good exposure for the sky and a good exposure for the water. But sometimes you just got to pick and choose what you think works best. If you care more about the sky, you'd expose for that. If you care more about the ground, you'd expose for that. I'd like to explain what makes up exposure. So whenever you're picking up a camera and you're deciding what you're going to take a picture of, you're going to be dealing with these 4 items that go together to make your exposure. So exposure is the picture itself. And when we're talking about exposure, we talk about how bright or dark that picture is going to be, based on your decision with the 4 other things that go as to what makes up exposure. So the first thing you're always going to deal with is available light. So that's the amount of light that you have to work with to make the picture happen. So whether you're inside with a low amount of light or outside with a large amount of light, that's going to be the first thing that you base everything else off of. Next is aperture. Aperture is the size of the opening inside the lens that's going to let more or less light in. It also affects something called depth of field. Shutter speed is the length of time that the picture is being taken for, and it's going to affect the amount of light, again, just like aperture, but also it'll change how movement is seen, whether it's stop action or showing motion. The last thing is ISO. ISO is happening within the camera, and it's how the camera is absorbing light. So whether you have a high ISO and it's going to absorb a lot of light, or a low ISO and it's going to affect the by absorbing a little bit amount of light. All those go together to create exposure.